A very warm welcome to you all for our NVivo literature reviews session. Matt and I are really looking forward to giving you a bit of an overview as to what NVivo can offer your literature reviews that you're doing as part of your research. If I haven't met you before, my name's Lynn Lavery. I'm from an Auckland-based research company called Academic Consulting. We, amongst other things, teach people how to use NVivo, hence why I am here today as part of the ResBaz sessions. I am joined behind the scenes by Matt Plummer from Victoria University's Research Office, another fellow NVivo enthusiast, and Matt is going to be answering your questions in the background as I present today. So just for those that are just connecting now, we are encouraging everyone to pop questions into the Q&A rather than the chat. Matt will be answering them as I go through, and if we have any time at the end, I might tackle a few questions that are of general interest, but we'll see how we are time-wise. I am very conscious today that probably most of you are signed up to the 10 a.m. session on transcription. I'm signed up for that session as well, so I am going to try and finish us up in a timely manner so that we can all transition across to that particular webinar, but I'm got a lot to get through this morning, so we'll see how we go time-wise, but that's my plan, certainly. Now, in terms of how today's session will run, a couple of comments to make front up. Firstly, it is a demonstration only, so it's not designed to be hands-on. This is a little bit of a taster to give you a feel about the functionality of NVivo and what that might offer your literature reviews. At the end of the session, I will be talking about some hands-on training you can access if you would like to learn more. The session today is also for two audiences. So some of you I can see from the chat messages earlier, you are brand new to NVivo. Others have more experience, and I am pitching the content so that it's going to be relevant to both groups. For those of you who are brand new, I'm not going to go back over the content that I covered in my webinar on Monday. So if you are brand new to NVivo, I will make a couple of comments about the software front up, but I will be actually encouraging you to watch the recording of Monday's session if you weren't there. So Matt is just going to pop in the chat for you a link to the recording from Monday's session. Really encourage you to have a look at that in conjunction with today's webinar. And the other thing, sorry, I'm making you work really hard in the chat here, Matt. The other thing I'm going to ask Matt to pop in, I have a frequently asked questions document that is for folk who are new to NVivo. And that covers a lot of the more obvious questions you might have. Things like what kind of data types you can use with the software, what coding involves, how you get hold of a license, that type of thing is all in that frequently asked questions document. So I will just make a couple of comments before I get underway about the functionality of the software, but otherwise I'll be directing those of you that are brand new to those two resources. Now, for those that are more experienced, the good news is there is nothing special you need to learn to use NVivo for a literature review. So if you are already working with NVivo, perhaps with primary data such as interviews, focus groups, observations, web pages, that kind of information, anything you're already doing in those types of projects can be transferred across to NVivo for literature reviews. So today's session should give you some really good ideas as to how you can use the skills you already have on an NVivo literature review project. So that is my intro comments out the way. Just one final thing to say, actually, I realized on Monday I didn't explicitly say anything about licensing. I might just ask Matt to pop a link to the software vendor in the chat, just in case anyone's curious. We have a really mixed audience for today's session. So some of you are based at universities or tertiary organisations such as polytechnics. Check with your organisation about licensing. So most New Zealand-based tertiary institutes do have licensing of some kind for NVivo. So check with them before you go purchasing. It is a little pricey to buy. A lot of the government departments here in New Zealand and some of the research institutes also have licensing, but you'll need to check with whoever looks after research for your organisation or your IT department about that. If anyone needs to purchase the software, neither Matt or I deal with that side of things. We're just very enthusiastic users and trainers of the software. So you will need to contact the software vendor directly if you need to purchase. Okay, folks, let's jump across to a literature review project. So I've got a couple of projects I'm going to be showing today. One is in the early stages of a literature review, and then about halfway through, I'm going to jump across to a project that's a little bit further along. The topic of this literature review project is transcription, which is a topic I use every year, but it's very timely given that the session following me this morning at ResBaz is also on transcription. I figure if you are here at an NVivo session, transcription is probably something that you will be needing to do. So therefore, hopefully the content is relevant to you, as well as learning a little bit about NVivo. Now, just for those of you that are brand new, the few comments I'll make in terms of what NVivo actually is. So NVivo is software that will assist you with qualitative or mixed methods research projects. It won't help you at all if you're working with numbers, but if you have any sort of qualitative data, and I'm thinking here anything that is text-based or perhaps images, video, those types of qualitative data, then NVivo has tools that can assist you with that. And it is the ability for it to work with text that makes it incredibly relevant to literature reviews. So interestingly, NVivo is not designed for working with literature. It's software that is designed to help you analyze text. But if we think about that, literature is just a different form of text. So it's a little bit different to things like interviews, transcripts, and focus group transcripts, but both are based on text. And so because of that, that's why NVivo has such a huge range of tools that are helpful for literature review projects. It is not going to do the work for you. So just like I said in Monday's session in relation to primary data, there's no magic wand here, folks. If you've turned up today hoping that that was the case, do feel free to exit out the session and spend the rest of the time doing something that will be more useful. There are some automated coding tools in NVivo, so there is some functionality that will help you detect sentiment and detect themes. Look, I've tested it on a number of projects over the years. It's incredibly hit and miss. So ultimately, it's you as the researcher that needs to be reading the literature, that needs to be working through, marking it up to identify particular topics and keywords and so on, and then summarizing that in whatever piece of research work you're writing. So NVivo is definitely not a magic wand, but as you are hopefully about to see, it has some pretty impressive tools to support those processes. So I have an NVivo project on screen at the moment, and we are going to be working through a few different aspects of this. Firstly, let's talk about the types of literature you can work with in NVivo. So I imagine for most of you, the literature type you will primarily be wanting to work with is full text PDFs of literature, which obviously these days we get very easy access to. I suspect most of you have hundreds, if not thousands, of PDFs on your system with journal articles that potentially could be imported into NVivo. You can see a few of those are actually on screen at the moment, and I'll be opening up one of these to show you very shortly. Other examples of literature, though, would include web pages. You could have abstracts that you've exported from reference management software. You might have notes that you've taken on books that you've read. So all those different types of literature can be worked with in NVivo. Now, I like to organize my literature in folders. So just down the left-hand side here in NVivo, you can see I've got a couple of folders set up, one for journal articles and one for abstracts. So folders in NVivo, they're a tool that helps you organize your information. And they are your control as the researcher. You decide what will be most helpful for you, how many you want to have, what gets stored inside them, etc. So for me personally, I like to set up my folders based on literature type. That seems to be the way my brain works, but I've certainly seen other researchers' projects where they perhaps organize their folders based on topic, or perhaps geographical area that particular research relates to. It could be by time period. There's all sorts of possibilities there. And as is always the case with any sort of research tool, whether it's NVivo or something else that you might be using across or learning across ResBaz Week, it's up to you to pick the functionality in the software that's going to best work for you and sort of adapt it to how you like to work best. So we've got some folders. They contain literature. Just to show you a couple of the examples I've got on screen here. So as I mentioned, these are a series of journal articles. I'll open up the, let's open up the MeroJaff article because we'll be using that again shortly. So this was a PDF of a journal article. I have downloaded it on my computer and imported it into NVivo. I will be showing you that importing process very shortly. Now, when I come into this PDF, I just come down a bit, I am actually able to very specifically select sentences, words, phrases, paragraphs, and so on. Now, that is because the PDF that I've imported here is OCR. OCR stands for optical character recognition. It's just a complicated way of saying that the text is inside the PDF. So if you have a PDF that you can select text in, that means it's OCR. And when it gets imported to NVivo, you will be able to select text this way. You will also be able to use some of the text searching functionality that I'll be showing in the second half of today. So ideally, you'll have as many of your PDFs as OCR as possible. Now, if you have got PDFs, sometimes older journal articles, and they do need to be quite old, most recent PDFs are OCR, but if you've got any older files or anything that's a scanned image, that may not necessarily be OCR. It is possible to use something like Adobe Acrobat Professional to convert it into an OCR format. A little bit hit and miss in terms of how successful you'll be with that. Often depends on the original quality of the file. But certainly if it's a file that is of particular importance, if it's a really key file for your project, that's something that you might want to consider doing. Now, the other kind of information I have in here, I've got a folder called Abstracts Only, and I'm just going to open up this file here. Now, one of the things I think it's worth thinking really carefully about if you are planning to use NVivo for a literature review is how much information you want to bring in to an NVivo project. So NVivo projects can be quite large. They can actually be up to 10 gigabytes in size. And I can tell you from experience, that's huge. It's a massive number of files. But NVivo runs much better and much faster with smaller projects. So you can imagine PDFs in particular and some of the other larger types of files we work with as researchers, they can take a huge amount of space in your project. So you might just want to have a think, be a little bit strategic about which ones you want to bring in to your project. I always bring the key PDFs in. If it's something that I want to interact with, I want to read, I want to code, I want to be able to search the file, I will bring the actual PDF into NVivo. If it is something that is of lesser importance, like the files you can see on screen at the moment, this is something that I have taken from my reference management software. So from memory, this was actually exported from EndNote, which is what I was using at the time. I've just actually dragged and dropped these references with the attached abstracts into a Word document, and I've been able to import that in. So anything that is of lesser importance, but you want a record of it in your project, consider maybe just bringing a file in that has some really simple abstracts so that you could code and work with the abstracts, rather than sort of bloating out the file size and making the NVivo project a little bit unwieldy. So as I mentioned before, there are quite a few different types of literature we can work with in NVivo. In the interest of time, I am going to stick just to those two types, but hopefully seeing those has given you a bit of a feel. And I am now actually going to show you how you would go through that process of importing a journal article that's in PDF form. Now, something I should have said when I was back on this MeroJaff article, I can see a question from Werner there. If a file isn't OCR, can you use the region functionality to code it? And yes, you can. So just up here on the ribbon, at the moment, I'm set to text for my selection tool, but I can actually come to region. And this is super helpful if you are working with PDFs where they're not OCR, or maybe you have a lot of images or things like figures, graphs, tables, that kind of thing, that actually can be really, really helpful for selecting those. It does mean that you can't search those articles, unfortunately, because there's no text for NVivo to locate, but you can certainly use that region functionality as a little bit of a workaround if you need to. Thanks for that question, Werner. I did mean to say that when I was talking about PDFs. Right, folks, let's show you how quick and easy it is to import a journal article. So I have got a PDF ready to go here. It is relating to transcription. I want to bring it into my project. So all I've done here, folks, is right-clicked. So I'm a huge fan of the right-click in NVivo. It is the way to do pretty much everything. You can see Matt smiling there. I know he does that as well. So I'm just choosing here, import items. And we are going to come into my folder for today. And I've got this Davidson article. All I need to do is select that and click open, and I will import that. Now I'm about to get a dialog box where it is asking me how I would like the file to be named. So really interesting here, researchers I work with have very different preferences for this. So I personally tend to remember my journal articles by the author and year. Another option for naming your literature would be to include the title. And really, there's no right or wrong here. It's whatever is going to work for you personally. I'd really encourage you to be consistent with this, though. So pick one or the other. I'm bringing this in with author and year because, as I say, that's what I can relate to. It's how I remember my files. So I'm just going to click OK here. You'll see that that Davidson article is now in my NVivo project. I'll just open that up quickly just to show you what it looks like. It'll look very similar to that Miro Jaff item though. So I'm just coming down. You can see that that has come in, and once again, I can select text. So bringing literature into NVivo is as easy as those steps that I've just shown. Now, I am in a moment going to be talking through the process of coding in NVivo. Before I get there, though, I want to talk through a little bit around making connections and linking in your NVivo projects. So this is something we do a lot as researchers when we are working with literature. We are wanting to make connections across articles that we're reading, across authors, etc. And NVivo has some really helpful tools to assist with that process. So I am going to be linking back to this Davidson article in a moment, but I'm actually going to be doing this from the Miro Jaff article. So I'm just going to open that up. Everyone's been quite quiet on the question front this morning, Matt, which is very surprising. So folks, don't forget you can pop questions in the Q&A. It might be that everything is very clear so far, in which case I'm delighted to hear that. But if you do have questions as we are moving through, pop those in the Q&A and we can tackle them for you. Right, so I've got an article here on screen, and I'm actually just going to come down to this little section. And there's a couple of instances here where that Davidson article that I've just imported is referred to. So I'm going to show you a couple of the links that might be relevant for literature reviews. Now, a word of warning here, folks. If anyone has procrastination tendencies, and I bet there is more than a few of you in this group, you might want to zone out for the next couple of minutes, because linking is the kind of thing that you can get very carried away with and procrastinate over. And in fact, it's entirely possible in NVivo to link yourself around in circles without actually making any forward progress with your literature review. So this comes with a bit of a health warning, folks. Be a little bit careful if you are planning to use these tools. Now, I'm going to be showing annotations and see also links. Annotations are available in both the Windows and Mac version of NVivo. Unfortunately, see also links is only available in Windows. So just a bit of a heads up, I suspect we've got more than a few Mac folk in the group today. But annotations are certainly available in both Windows and Mac, and I'm going to just highlight this first instance of the Davidson reference. Now, I've read Davidson, And I don't actually remember this particular point being made. So I want to make a note to myself that I need to go back to that article and reread it. So I'm going to do that with an annotation. I think of annotations as being a little bit like writing a margin note on a piece of literature. So actually even just making a little note in the margin, or putting a post-it note on a hard copy of a piece of literature. So it's just for little short notes that you want to make for yourself. So I'll right click over top and I'm coming down to new annotation. And I'm just going to type down on Windows for NVivo, you get a little, almost like a footnote window pop up here. On the Mac, you get a little pop-up bubble screen. And I'm just going to type, don't recall this point, need to check. Now, if I click back inside the literature, you can see that that is highlighted in blue. That reminds me that I've got an annotation, and I often use the annotations actually on a literature review project. It's almost like a bit of a things to do list for myself. Sometimes it's reflections, really short reflections that I want to make, but often it is for things like this, something that I need to actually action in my project. Now, the other thing I'm going to do here is show you a See Also link. And as I said, apologies for those of you on the Mac. This isn't currently functionality for NVivo for Mac. I'm going to link out to the actual Davidson article here. So just right-clicking over top and coming down, I've got a links menu. I'm choosing See Also link, new See Also link. And I can select, I go into my, bring that on the other screen there. Let's just find that Davidson item. Here we go. I'll click OK and OK. And now when I click back into that PDF, you can see I've got a pink highlight. So blue highlights for annotations, pink highlights are for See Also links. It's appearing down the bottom here. And what I can actually do when I'm reading the Merojaff article, if I see that See Also link, I can say to myself, oh, I've got the Davidson article connected here. And I can just double click on it down the bottom here, and it will open up the Davidson article for me. So really nice to have those sort of links. As I said before, I think of annotations more like putting a post-it note on something. See Also links, I think of more like hyperlinks. They allow you to move elsewhere within your NVivo project. Now, annotations are super helpful for short notes you want to make for yourself. If you are wanting to write longer sets of notes, maybe reflections on articles that you've read, or reflections on the literature in general, or perhaps on specific authors, the space to do that is memos. So I'm just going to come down the side here. I've got a folder for memos, and I'm just going to come to a memo that I've already set up. Just opening that up. But you can see I've got folders here for both author-based memos and topic-based memos as well. Now, if you are working with NVivo on a project that's based on primary data, often your memos will be reflections about your data analysis. Memos are actually a qualitative research tool. They're for your own reflections, thoughts, thinking. Same applies to literature though. So I've actually just brought up an example memo that I started to create that sort of records everything I've done in my NVivo project relating to my literature. As I said before, you can also have longer memos that relate to an entire article or a particular author, and they can actually be linked to specific files or specific codes within your NVivo project, which is quite neat as well. Now, I must say, the very first time I used NVivo for a literature review, it was the first time I made a memo that I started to get quite excited about it. Some of you in the audience today know me quite well, and I think I give the impression to people that I am terribly organized. So I'm going to own up and say that is not the case at all. I know I'm very good at giving that impression, but things are often a little bit chaotic in my workspace. I'm one of these researchers that I have scribbled notes all over my physical workspace, some on post-it notes and notepads. My desktop is usually a real mess of files. And I really have to rein that tendency in because I know that is not an effective way to work as a researcher. So one of the things I really love about NVivo is it helps me rein those tendencies in because my NVivo project is my central database that holds everything to do with my research. So when I was doing my very first NVivo literature reviews project, I had my PDFs in here, and then I realized I could also take my notes. That was where I really started to see how helpful NVivo can be for a literature review project. And if you're anything like me and you do have a tendency to be a little bit messy, you may well like that functionality. Okay, folks, I think we are at the stage where I can talk a little bit about coding. So we've talked about the types of literature you can work with, a little bit about how you can link and write extra notes for yourself. Probably, though, the most useful aspect of the software is the ability to code your journal articles and other types of literature that you're working with. So we'll just close these down. And I'm going to keep the Davidson PDF open. That's one I'm going to be showing you some sample coding on. And I'll jump on the left-hand side here to the codes folder. Now, codes in NVivo. Some of you might be familiar with older versions of the software. They referred to codes as nodes. They're exactly the same thing. So if you haven't used these recent versions, codes and nodes are identical. And codes on a project which is based on primary data will be to do with the codes and themes within your project. So your actual data analysis gets stored in codes. How does that translate to a literature review project? Well, for me personally, I am usually coding based on topics and subtopics in my literature. You could potentially code on keywords. Ultimately, it's entirely up to you what sort of codes you might have. The best advice I can give you here is to be thinking towards your write-up. That's something we would be doing in data analysis anyway. You always want to be thinking towards that write-up stage, what you're going to be presenting. So the same applies to a literature review project. If you're looking for a few ideas, a couple of my favorite codes are here on screen. So if I'm using NVivo for a literature review, I always have a definitions code. That is for the really good definitions about my topic. So anything that defines transcription for this project would go there. My PhD was on self-regulated learning. Anything around that particular topic would go at a definitions code. So that's super helpful if you're later writing up something about your topic and you need to define it. Great quotes is for those really amazing quotes that you know you want to include in your literature review. And the trick here is to code at great quotes, but also code at whatever idea it belongs to. NVivo has something called a coding query that you can run that will allow you to look for everything at great quotes if it's also coded at one of the topics in your project. And that is a really fast, speedy thing that will assist you with your writing when you're at that stage. Let's talk about, though, how we actually do some coding. Now, as I hinted at before, you as the researcher are coming up with the ideas for these codes. And I've just started to build some of the codes for this transcription project here. So you can see I've got something around the practicalities of transcription, and I've got some subcodes here for cost, software, and transcribers. Just a heads up, folks, the language or the terminology that the software company use in relation to these codes, it talks about parent and child and grandchild codes. So that's just something to keep an eye out for in terms of when you're looking at the help files. It's a slightly unusual way of looking at it, but it does actually work quite well. So I am going to code some text at one of my existing codes, and I'm also going to show you how to make a brand new code. And then I'll jump across to a project that I've done a little bit of coding in so that you can see this at a more progressed stage. So I am just going to scroll down here. Here we go. So I have got some, it's actually, here we go. I'm going to just zoom in a bit on this, just for those of us with older eyes, perhaps. So I've got a paragraph here. It's to do with working with transcribers. And I want to code that at the topic code that I've set up for transcribers. So really simple process here. This works across both Windows and Mac. I'm going to hover over the text. I click and hold with my mouse. I move across. And when I'm right on top of transcribers here, I let go. And you can see that it's done the coding. So I've got one file and one reference. Reference doesn't refer to references in the sense that you'd normally think of in a literature review project. That's the number of pieces of text that have been coded. Now I'll just open up the transcriber's code so that you can see what that looks like once you've done a bit of coding. And then I'll just show you a slightly different technique for coding that you might like. So all that's done is taken a copy of that paragraph that I selected. It's stored it inside the code for transcribers. But even better, I can see where it's come from. And this is a really good reason for you to think quite carefully about how you name your files and folders. I'm a huge fan of naming files and folders as simply and clearly as you can, because when you do coding, you see that information above each reference, and that can actually convey quite a lot of really helpful information for you. Now, that will look a lot more impressive when I jump across to my project that's a little bit further along. So let's just close that. I'll show you one more piece of coding before I do that. So I'm just going to come down, and we've got a chunk of text here to do with technology. Now, this is a 2009 file. Things have changed quite significantly since then. And if you're interested in learning more about that, do connect into the 10 o'clock session today, which is all about transcribing. But we're just going to take this particular chunk of text, and I'm going to code this slightly differently. So I could drag and drop to a new code here, but I'm going to show you a different technique just by right-clicking over top. So right-clicking here and choosing code selection. And I'll just move this across. So this I want to put as a child code underneath practicalities. So I'm actually selecting practicalities first. I'm just coming over and selecting new child code, and I'll call this technology and just press enter. That's now made the code for me, and I can click this button down the bottom. And that has actually not just made the code, but it's done the coding at the same time. Now, there are multiple ways to code in NVivo. They're just a couple of possible examples. I choose those two because they are the most commonly used coding techniques amongst the NVivo users that I work with. They're also the two techniques that largely work the same across both Windows and Mac. Okay, I am going to jump across. This is a little bit like a bad cooking show. I've got something that was in the oven earlier, a pre-prepared example that I'm going to move across to. While I'm doing that, because it's just going to take me a little bit to do the switch, this would be a great chance to either ask a question or let us know in the chat what you think of NVivo so far. So either ask a question if you have one, or grab the chat panel, let Matt and I know what you're thinking in terms of, are you quite excited so far about the use of NVivo for lit reviews? Have I not convinced you yet? Where are you sort of sitting in terms of your thoughts? So while you are typing that, I'm just going to jump across. I will save that just in case we need it. So I'm not seeing any enthusiastic comments yet. Are you all awake out there? Have you had your cup of coffee for the morning and your wheat bix or anything else you needed to have a head start on the day? What are thoughts so far? Okay, so we've got all good from Bonnie there. What about others? Amanda's just taking it all in. Thanks for the smiley face, Jenny. It's lovely to see you here this morning. Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know you're still awake, David. That's awesome. If you prefer, folks, do feel free to use the Zoom reactions to interact with Matt and I, but it is nice to know that folk are out there and listening. There is more fun stuff to come, though. So some of the stuff I've sort of covered so far is maybe partly a little bit administrative, the kind of thing you could possibly do in online note-taking software or multiple Word documents. Some of the things we're about to move into, though, would be much harder to do with those tools. So if you perhaps aren't fully convinced yet, hold tight. I think you will start to see some of the possibilities that may be beneficial in terms of making your process a little bit more efficient. Lovely stuff, folks. Thanks for all those comments. I suspect, Mandy, you're not the only person that is wishing you had a lit review to do right now. Actually, one other thing to say, folks, if you are planning on using NVivo for data, but perhaps don't have data at this stage, setting up a literature review project is a really great way to learn the software. It means that you can not only use it really effectively and efficiently for your literature review, but then when you do get data for your research project, you're already going to know how to use the software. So if you're sitting there thinking that you like the look of NVivo, but you maybe don't have any data at this stage, do make sure you have a wee play around, get some literature in, explore the functionality, and I think you will be pleasantly surprised as to what it can offer. And as I say, it's absolutely perfect when you're at the stage of needing to use it for actual data analysis. Right, thanks for that interaction, folks. Let's get back to demonstrating a few things here. So I jumped into a version of that project that's a little bit more advanced. And one of the things you can see here is that the 6 articles have all been coded. So we've got quite a few codes have been applied to each of these articles, and there's a number of references as well. So just a reminder, codes is obviously the number of codes that have been used for that file, and references is the number of pieces of text that have been coded there. Let's come and look at a code that's a little bit further along. So I'm going to open up here the benefits of transcription code. So if you picture for a moment that you are at the stage of your project where you're wanting to write up your literature review, you can see here that these are potentially the topics that you might include. And when I open up one of those topics, inside the code is all of the pieces of text that relate to that particular topic. So if I was writing up a section in my review on benefits of transcription, all I need to do is open that code up, and I can scroll through and see all of the text from my journal articles that relates to that particular idea or topic. Now, you would obviously need to then summarize that in your own words. As I said at the start of today, NVivo isn't going to do the work for you here, but hopefully you can see just how helpful that would be to be able to see everything to do with one topic, subtopic, keyword in one place. Now I'm just going to scroll up to the top here, and this is something that I showed in Monday's session, but I think it's worth reiterating. So when you have coded something in NVivo, there is always a link back to the original source. So I've got this particular paragraph from the Grundy article that's been coded here. I can actually, if I want to see where that text came from, so maybe have a look at the context it was mentioned, I can right-click over top, and there's an option here, Open Referenced File. Now that actually takes me back to the journal article, and it will, when it opens up, time delay there. Here we go. So I can actually see that piece of coding that I've done in the context of the original PDF, and that's a super helpful function when you are writing up your review. The other thing I'll show you here, I'll just turn off that highlighting so it doesn't confuse matters. I can also have a look at a piece of literature like a journal article, and I can ask NVivo to show me all of the places that that's been coded. And once again, this was something I showed on Monday, but I think it's worth showing again here. Just coming up to coding stripes, and I'll ask to show all coding stripes. So, and of course, my head immediately wants to do this as I am seeing that. So this down the right-hand side, You can see there are coloured stripes showing. I'm just scrolling down. You can see that they are appearing down the side as I move through the article. And this is actually showing me where the text has been coded. So if I click here on participant transcribers, it's highlighting the text in the pink colour to match the stripe. I can click here on software and technology and it will do the same. And coming down here to external transcribers, and I can see the yellow text. So that's a super helpful function when you are reviewing the coding that you've done on the literature. Now, I am going to just make a quick comment here about whether or not you would code literature versus coding notes that you've taken on the literature, because there are some different schools of thought here. I personally quite like to code my actual PDF journal articles. I find that a really helpful process for me personally. I know some of my fellow NVivo trainers feel that that's not an active way to work with the literature and they prefer to code the notes that they've taken. But actually, if you're doing it right, coding is a very active process. So I think, there's a huge amount of value in you coding the actual journal articles themselves. You may also decide to code some notes, and that would be fine also. But once again, there's no right or wrong to this. It is actually all about what will work for you personally. Right, we're going to talk about queries next. So I will close down the tabs here. And queries was something I touched very briefly on in Monday's session. Queries are ways of asking questions in NVivo. And there's sort of two groups of questions that can be asked. You can query your text and you can query your coding. There is a type of query that combines both of those, but let's make things nice and simple for today. We won't overcomplicate it by going into that one. So both types of queries can be super useful on a project that is for a literature review. I'll show you a couple of examples of text-based queries to start. Just coming up to the Explore tab of the ribbon here, we'll start with a word frequency query. Now, both word frequency queries and text search queries, which is the next one I'll show, they can be a little bit limited in terms of their usefulness on projects that are based on interview, focus group transcripts, that kind of information. And that's because it's very rare for people to use a consistent set of terms when they talk about concepts. In the literature, though, we do use standard terminology, don't we? There's particular keywords, there's specific terms we use in our disciplines. So that actually makes the text search and word frequency queries in NVivo incredibly helpful. I'm not saying they're not a little bit useful. You can use them on projects that are based on primary data as well. And some of you saw me demo that in Monday's session, but I think they are even more useful on a literature review. So I'm just going to make a couple of quick changes here. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to knock a 0 off that. So I'm asking NVivo to show me the 100 most frequently occurring words, and I'm setting it to minimum length 5. So I only want it to count words that are 5 characters or longer. Now, if you were paying attention on Monday, you might remember that I set that to 4 in Monday's session. So why am I doing it differently here? Well, on a literature review project, if you set it to 4, you get all the years of publication because they are 4 characters long. So I like to set this so that it's looking for anything that is 5 characters or longer, just so that it excludes the years of publication, which typically isn't super helpful. I'm just going to run this. And it's kind of reassuring to see that transcription was the most frequently occurring word, along with research and qualitative. So looking at this word list, this might be a really useful starting point for you for your coding. It can give you ideas for possible codes for your project, but also just helps you get a feel for the literature, which is super helpful. You can view this in a couple of ways. So we're looking at the word list with the frequency counts here. You can also view this as a word cloud, and it takes a little while to come up. So I'll just click that button and talk a little bit while it's having a think about it. So word clouds are the exact same results as the list you've just seen, but the words that occur more frequently will appear in a larger font. Now, it's not a form of analysis at all, but it can be very, very useful for getting a feel for the information that you're working with. Can also be really helpful for PowerPoint presentations if you are giving presentations on your literature or your data. So I'm just coming here, and you can see that this is exactly the same as what we were seeing in the list, but it's amazing how often I look at the list and then take the time to look at the visual, and I spot words that I didn't see at all when I was looking at all of the words listed. It sort of just draws my attention to particular terms. So I always like to look at my literature both ways here. So that's one of the types of queries that we can run based on text. Now, that particular query, just in case the question comes in, I have asked that to look across everything in my project. You can ask NVivo to just search for a specific set of files, and that's where having those folders can be really helpful. So it might be you are wanting to do a word frequency query or a text search, but only on your journal articles. And if you have a folder with your journal articles, it's very quick to set that up so that NVivo only looks in that location. So the default is across everything, but you can look more specifically. Now I'll run a quick text search query as well before we get into matrix coding queries and reference management software. So just popping in here, the word frequency query, that was a more general search, just looked for the most frequent words. Here I'm actually looking for very specific term. So I'm looking for the word errors if it occurred in my literature, and I'm just keeping this as per the previous query to everything in my project. So I'll run that. And obviously you can put any term that's relevant to your literature review project in here. I just know there's some talk in these files around transcription errors. So this is a summary, which I don't find super helpful. I'm just going to click down the side here. There's an option for reference. And that's actually pulling out for me each individual find where the term errors has been used. And I can actually skim through and get a bit of a sense for how the literature was referring to this specific term. I can also bring up a visualization for this. So I'm doing a bit of a 2-for-1 here, folks, in the interest of time. I'm showing visualizations as part of queries. You can actually run visualizations in their own right in NVivo as well, but the fact that they're included as part of the queries functionality is super useful. So I'll just come to the word tree, and that may be a little bit hard to see. Let me just undock that, just to make it a bit bigger for you all. And bear with me while I bring that across on the other screen. Here we go. So what this does is it takes the word errors and 5 words either side, and it groups together the words that occur just prior and just after. So I can see there's quite a few references here for grammatical errors. Fellow perfectionists in the group may be drawn to that particular one. We've got transcription errors. I found this one really interesting as well. Errors can come from, and it's showing you the specific ends of those sentences. So it's amazing how helpful that can be on a literature review project, that ability to look for a term and then seeing this word tree so that you can actually look for the patterns very, very easily. And these can get quite large if you've got a large amount of literature in your project, but they're super, super helpful to know about. And I can see some enthusiastic comments there in the chat. So there are a couple of examples of text-based queries for you. Let's show you a quick coding query. And once again, this is one of these pre-prepared examples that I've set up. Now, actually, before I show you this query, I'd better show you something called classifications in this project. So what you should see on screen here is some information about the 6 journal articles in this project. And this is something that I have set up myself as the researcher. You're about to see when I show the EndNote import, how that comes across from reference management software, but I actually like to input this information myself. And I've chosen for these 6 articles to include the year of publication, the discipline the authors were from, the country they were from, and also the journal that the article was published in. So you as the researcher, you decide what these characteristics or descriptive characteristics might be, and you can input them to your project. That's well beyond today's quick demo, but I did just want to show you that they have been set up. Now I'll close that down. The reason you would have that in is you can then take those characteristics and put them up against the coding that you've done. So I'm interested, I've got some codes in this project around transcription quality, and I've also got, as you've just seen, information about the author discipline. So I'm going to run this. This is called a matrix coding query in NVivo. And what I can actually see here, by just having a wee think about it there, it's having quite a long think about it. I'll talk while it's doing that. So I can actually see for each of the disciplines in this particular project, and I think it's going to, no, it's not going to let me resize that. There we go. So for each of the disciplines, it's showing me a breakdown of the codes within this project. So looking at this, looks like quite a few of the articles talked about errors, and there's different patterns here in terms of how the different disciplines discussed these particular concepts. If I want to actually look in detail at one of these, I can double click, and it does look like NVivo's having a bit of a moment here, but it looks like it is going to open that up for me. So this is showing me for just one of those disciplines exactly what was said about this topic of errors. So it's allowing you to sort of filter down the coding that you've done based on particular characteristics. And that can be super helpful. It might be that you're wanting to look at more recent articles versus those that were published a while ago. You might want to compare Northern Hemisphere authors to Southern Hemisphere authors. There's all sorts of possibilities there in terms of the kinds of comparisons you can make. So that is definitely one of my favorite features for using NVivo for a literature review. Now, I am conscious of time, and I suspect most of you came along today wanting to see NVivo in relation to reference management software. So let's talk about that. And I'll jump across, we sidestep here into EndNote. Now, I always have a bit of dilemma with these webinars as to what to demonstrate these steps with. NVivo is compatible with 5 different reference management software. So EndNote, Zotero, Citavi, RefWorks, and Mendeley are all possible. Let us know in the chat which one you're using. I'm actually a Zotero user, so I'm a huge fan of Zotero. I use it for all my writing, but I suspect most of you are probably using EndNote, so that's why I've chosen to demonstrate with EndNote today. I might have got that wrong, you know, looking at the chat. It looks like we've got lots of Zotero users, Matt, which is great to see. Awesome. Okay. Oh no, we've got quite a few EndNote as well. Okay.
And Ron, just to interrupt quickly there, someone had asked earlier, and I think you're just about to get to this, like, why would I use NVivo in addition to Zotero? Like, so
great.
Hopefully it's clear, but just to highlight that question had come through earlier.
Yeah, and actually on that note, Matt, just to emphasize the point that you would need to use both. So EndNote or Zotero, whatever it is you're using, has the cite while you write functionality that you will need to cite your references and generate reference lists. This is simply a process of bringing across the reference information and particularly the linked PDFs. Now, why would you do this? Well, interestingly, I'm going to demo this for you, but this isn't what I do. So I actually find there's quite a few steps involved in this process. And I actually always have a folder of my PDFs anyway, and I find it much more simpler just to import that folder of PDFs. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, why would I do this? Well, maybe you actually don't need to. But this is the kind of question that people always come to this session with. So that's why I'm going to show this particular functionality. So the idea here is you'd have your references set up in some sort of reference management software. You can see in EndNote here, for those of you familiar with it, I have linked PDFs. Now, this is a bit of a sort of double-step process. I need to export these. So I'm going to come to File, come down to Export. And here we go. So a couple of things I'm going to change here. I need to make this a XML format and also RIS in terms of the export. So I'm just going to click Save here. I'm going to jump back across now to NVivo, and I'm hoping it's behaving itself now. So what I've done is I've taken those 6 references and I've imported them across to NVivo. Well, sorry, I've exported them out. I'm now importing them in. So I'm just coming right-click, Import From, EndNote. And it's on my desktop. Here's the file. And I get a whole bunch of sort of settings that I can play around with if I would like to. Just going to click Import here. I'll leave all of the defaults as is. This sometimes takes a while to come across, but what that's done is it's taken those 5 linked PDFs, it's brought them into NVivo. So I've got all of my PDFs from EndNote across into NVivo. The other thing it's done is brought across some classifications. So I've got a new classification showing here. This is from my EndNote import. And if I open that up, you can see it's actually brought quite a lot of information across from my EndNote library there. So I did that in a bit of a hurry. Let's just recap the process and what that was all about. So obviously one of the key advantages to using NVivo for a literature review is being able to code your PDFs. If you have your PDFs stored in something like EndNote or Zotero, you can, if you have linked PDFs, export that out as a file. The steps are different for the different reference management software, but it's quite similar to what I've just shown you from EndNote. And then you can bring that file into NVivo. Now, one of the downsides of that is it's a one-off process. So if I now update my EndNote library, my NVivo project doesn't automatically update. So it is something you need to stay on top of if you're going to go through that process. And you can also see that it has brought across quite a lot of information, some of which we'll probably never use in our project. So that's a couple of the reasons why I find this a little bit so-so. I do know some researchers who love to work this way, and you might be one of them. But this is just another way that you can import your reference information if you already have it stored elsewhere. Okay, folks, I am going to wind us up there in terms of content. Just a few quick things to say. And I would love it if you could let me know in the chat if you were excited about using NVivo for lit reviews. Pop a quick comment there. If you're interested in learning more about NVivo for literature reviews specifically, find out, first of all, from your organisation whether you can access NVivo training. Don't think anyone here in New Zealand specifically offers NVivo for lit reviews training, but a lot of the universities, tertiary institutes and other places do offer more general NVivo training. If you're particularly interested in NVivo for lit reviews, I'm just popping in the chat a link to my Research Accelerator membership. That has a 2.5-hour step-by-step hands-on tutorial on exactly how to do everything I've just shown you today. So that's a great option for those of you that want to learn more. Have we got any final questions that I need to tackle here, Matt? How did we go on the question front? I
think we've covered most of them. There's a couple of project-specific things, as you can anticipate. I think for the most part, though, NVivo does give you the flexibility to create codes that will respond to those different methods, and it's just a matter of applying the methods that you've shown to the particulars of that case. And that's where something like the Research Accelerator or looking to delve a bit deeper into some support might get a more specific mapping of what you're looking to do with the functionality of NVivo. But in a general sense, you can create that metadata layer using NVivo on top of the text that you've got that's appropriate for the types of material you're working with. So that's the kind of high level parting shot that I have that hopefully you agree with.
I totally do. Couldn't have put it better myself, actually, Matt. That's a perfect recap. Well, I'm conscious of the time, and most of us are probably transitioning across to the next session. So shall we wind it up there, Matt? I will be in touch with the recording in case anyone wants to recap any of that. I'll email it out to everyone later this afternoon. Thanks for helping out, Matt. It's great to be presenting on this again with you this year.
Thank you, Lynn, for your time. Thanks everyone for coming along, and hope you enjoy some more sessions in ResBaz.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye, everyone. Might see you in the next session.